Hey guys, we had a big weekend this last weekend in college football. This is the Sports Idol podcast. Sports is in our DNA. We hope it's in yours too. A key injury could shake up the top four in the college football playoff race. We had a lot of action going, some upset predictions. We'll see how they did coming up next. We're going to get started with the Florida State Seminoles and the Alabama Crimson Tide, who we predicted had tune-up games, and they were exactly that. Alabama rolled 66-10 over Chattanooga, and Florida State won 58-13. However, the big news coming out of that game was the Jordon Travis lower leg injury. I watched it several times. Unfortunately, that appears to be the end of his season. I can't imagine. I haven't seen the news this morning as of this recording. This is Sunday morning. But I can't imagine he's going to be back for the rest of the season. And that is very significant as far as the top four and the college football playoff goes, because they have to travel to the Swamp and play Florida before the ACC championship game where they're going to face Louisville. Now, we're going to see how the committee, how they look at this injury. I would imagine there's no punishment as of right now because they won 58-13 without him. But that's something that you're just going to want to keep your eye on to see how they perform this next week against Florida, and just watch how the committee views that. So that is a significant injury. It's the most significant injury we've had right now late in the season since the rankings have been put out. The next game was the Georgia Bulldogs traveled to Neyland Stadium to take on the Tennessee Volunteers, and we predicted it would be 38-17 with the Bulldogs win. It ended up being 38-10, and the game went pretty much how we expected. Tennessee came out swinging, and then Georgia said, that's all you got, and steamrolled them, 38-10. And so Georgia is the reigning, defending, two-time national champions. They will remain that way until otherwise. The Texas Longhorns traveled to Ames, Iowa. We predicted they would win 27-24. Wouldn't have been surprised if they lost. What happened? Well, it was a 26-16 Texas win. And something happened that we were not thinking, but that was that Texas's run defense stifled Iowa State, held them to 9 yards rushing, made Iowa State one-dimensional. On the other side of things, Texas was able to get 404 yards of total offense, 123 of those on the ground. C.J. Baxter seemed just like a fine replacement for Jonathan Brooks, and the Longhorns did exactly what you need to do when you're in November, and that was get another quality road win in a tough environment. If you're the Longhorns, you got to like where you're at. You might need a little bit of help in front of you, but as of right now, if I'm a Longhorn, I'm really happy with where my team's at and what they look like this last weekend. The Ville, they went down to Miami, and they got the job done. 38-31, they beat a Hurricanes team, which the Hurricanes, if you look at just the stats, you would have thought the Hurricanes would have won that game. More total yards, less turnovers. But with the way that game flowed, Louisville did just what they needed to do. Anytime that it seemed like Miami was going to get the upper end, and that was a lot in the first half, Louisville came back and they held serve. And then in the second half, they got up, and then they did exactly what you need to do and just protected that lead and ended up taking the victory home. Now, it came down to a last-second Hail Mary that ended at the 5-yard line, which was dramatic, but it didn't feel, from a game control perspective, I didn't feel like Louisville was out of it in the second. I felt like they had control most of the second half. So hats off to those guys. With the Jordon Travis injury at Florida State, all of a sudden, Louisville could be the favorite to win that game, the ACC championship, which would shake things up here. We'll have a little bit more on that on our next show when we get into predictions. But Louisville, again, with the win down in Miami, that's a good win for those guys. And that's a good indication. If you are a Cardinal fan, you got to be pretty happy. The Buckeyes had senior night against Minnesota, and we predicted a 45-0 shutout. We were wrong. It was 37-3. I can't believe they allowed 3 points. The Buckeyes did, but it was incredibly dominant performance by the Buckeye defense. I think the number was 159 total yards for Minnesota. So the Buckeyes, again, their defense just strangles people. The running game, with Henderson, they are just a different team when he's running the football. And this was a nice tune-up for them as they head to Ann Arbor for the game of the year. Michigan took on Maryland. They traveled to Maryland to take on the Terrapins, and they won a close one, closer than a lot of people expected that to be. Now, this is the 58th ranked offense that they were playing in yards per play, and they gave the Wolverines all they could handle. I'm not so certain that I would love this performance if I'm a Wolverine fan with the Buckeyes coming to town. The Buckeyes are a much more balanced team, I think, than Maryland, and this did nothing to inspire confidence in me that the Wolverines are truly an elite team. So I think they're easy to overvalue. I'm not sold on them, and that is not a knock on, the Michigan fan base or anything. I'm just really not sold on them because they hadn't played anybody up until last week. And Penn State, again, I thought you could just overvalue them. So this game against Maryland, with the way the Terrapins were able to move the football, with the way they were able to score points, and they had a lot of self-inflicted wounds, which was the difference in the game to the Wolverines' benefit. So I think Ann Arbor next week is going to be a really, really interesting game, and we'll talk about that on the predictions coming up in a show later this week. The Oregon Ducks flew south to take on the Sun Devils. We talked about the Desert Curse, what that's looked like in the past, what might happen. We thought it was going to be a 46-13 football game. It ended up being 49-13, so we picked that one pretty close. It was 42-0 at the half, and Bo Nix had 6 touchdowns, and that game was over really right after it started. The Ducks looked the part. They looked very balanced. They looked dominant. But again, Arizona State is Arizona State. So the Ducks have their work cut out for them this week, where they take on the Oregon State Beavers. They're coming off a heartbreaking loss there to Washington last night and a cold night in Corvallis. And so we'll get into that one next. The Washington Huskies traveled to Oregon State down to Corvallis in our game of the week. We predicted that Oregon State would win 38-28. We thought the game would be really close, and then maybe a late turnover would swing the score a little bit more lopsided than the game. What actually happened was Washington did very Washington things, and they won a very tight game, 22-20. They had control the entire game, as they have most of the season, almost all season, and they find a way to win. Oregon State's driving. It seems like they had, control on the ground. They were running the ball, making all the plays, and then Washington State, somewhere around midfield, their defense just stands up and stops the Beavers. And then, when on the other side of the ball, when it comes down to a play that they have to make, they look to Odunze, and he makes a play, back shoulder throw to seal the game, and Penix with the perfect pass. And again, the Huskies continue to do exactly what they need to do to win big football games. The conditions were terribly difficult last night. Lots of rain. The ball was slipping all over. Special teams play was a big one there. The Beavers did have a safety that went out of the back of the end zone, so that was the 2-point difference. But hats off to Washington. I'm going to tell you, I think with the way that they've played and the schedule that they have played, they are incredibly undervalued by the committee. I'm going to continue to say that. They have a legitimate case to be the number 1 team in the country by resume right now. We'll talk about that, the predictions, and everything else on the next show after the playoff committee announces their next rankings. If I'm going to chalk up this weekend, great analogy, the table is set. Thanksgiving week. Thank you, college football, for doing that for us. We've got rivalry week right now into the conference championships, and this is shaping up to be a very, very entertaining finish to the college football season. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below, send us an email, or do whatever for the mailbag for next week's show. I'm Josh Rodriguez for Sports Idol Nation. Sports is in our DNA. I hope it's in yours too.